Okay, in this video, I'm going to explain the handout that just gives you some useful tips for developing your academic voice and style. We talked in the last video about how we're making that shift from very personal essays, which allow you to have a first person voice and your opinion and your and what you believe, but we're trying to kind of shift our attention to talking more like an academic, and approaching things from a scientific point of view, in the sense that we're going to be objective and not biased. And so there are a couple of general guidelines, and then I'm going to give you a couple of things that you always need to remember to do. So the first couple of ones are just about the things that you want to always kind of follow the rules here. So you always want to use third person. You want to completely omit the use of your second person you, and you want to use first person I very sparingly. I would even suggest that you not attempt to use it at all. Okay, your tone should be confident, knowledgeable, curious, fair-minded, careful, intelligent, and studied. You want to avoid sounding like an arrogant know-it-all. Confident, not cocky. You want to develop a sense of trust in that you understand what you're talking about, and in the sense of being able to discuss it. Your diction, your choice of words, should include words that you're comfortable using. Don't use a thesaurus to find those big words just to sound smart. The literary terms that I gave you in your list, you'll get one set for each unit. You need to know those literary terms, and not just knowing the definitions, but knowing how they apply to what we're reading. Assume that your reader always knows the meanings of those terms, so you don't have to define what an allusion is for your audience. However, you want to use those terms correctly. Your language should be straightforward and simple. Don't be flowery. Don't try to be poetic. Remember, we're trying to approach this from a scientific kind of point of view. Don't get emotionally involved with your author or subject. Remember that it is not your feelings about the poem or the story that we are reading. You want to remain analytical. You're the scientist. You're examining a specimen. You want to always write about literature in the present tense. Make sure that all of your verbs are present tense verbs. You want to make the distinction between the speaker and the poet and the author and the narrator. They're not always the same person. Sometimes they are, but oftentimes the writer will create or invent a speaker or a narrator. And you always want to make sure that you understand the distinction between the two. The author is not the narrator in that case, and the speaker is not always the poet. You want to refer to the author by his or her last name. In the very first paragraph, the introduction paragraph, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, you will use the full name. For example, in this particular example, in Plath, her first name is Sylvia. So in my first introductory paragraph, I want to identify her as Sylvia Plath. But from there forward, I want to use her last name only. I don't want to use Miss. I don't want to use Miss or Mr. Any of those references. You want to avoid contractions always. We talked about that last semester. Do not use contractions in your writing. You want to avoid pats on the back. You don't want to talk about how great a poem is or how great a poet is, or saying how great of a job that they do at something. You're analyzing, you're not reviewing what they're writing. You want to avoid announcing what your paper will do. In this paper, I will show you that in lines 44 through 45, he discusses, you don't want to discuss what the poet or author wants the reader to know. You want to show us through your analysis. Always avoid slang, colloquial, cliche, or text speak in your diction. You want to use we're going to call it our middle to high diction always. You don't, that's just formal writing. Avoid weak language that makes you sound unsure of yourself. In my opinion, I think, I feel, maybe, kind of, must have. To me, you want to avoid that. It makes you sound like you're not sure of what you're putting across, and it affects your credibility. Avoid asking rhetorical questions. Why is the speaker angry with her father? How would you feel in this situation? Because that usually lends itself to you inputting your own input, your own opinion or belief, and that's something that you want to avoid. So avoid asking a question as a rhetorical strategy. You want to avoid sweeping generalizations. I think we talked about this a little bit last semester. All women know that. All mothers love their children. Introductory statements that open up to all people in today's society throughout time. You want to focus on the text, avoid those generalizations at all cost. And then the last thing that you want to make sure that you avoid is summarizing the text. It's not a text summary, it's an analysis. It involves some summary. You have to summarize ideas, otherwise you would be writing extensive, pieces of prose. So you want to avoid summarizing unless it's absolutely necessary to carry ideas throughout your paper. And even then, you want to keep that very minimal. Okay. You also never want to do analysis when you have no quotes to support your ideas. So if you can follow these guidelines, you are guaranteed to write more in an academic voice and with academic style, which is what we're shooting for in this term.